What sort of evidence would prove that prayer actually works? The thing we pray for may happen, but how can you ever know it wasn't going to happen anyway? Even if the thing were definitely miraculous, it wouldn't follow that the miracle had occurred because of your prayers. Some years ago, writes C.S. Lewis, I got up one morning intending to have my hair cut in preparation for a visit to London, and the first letter I opened made it clear that I didn't need to go to London. So I decided to put off the haircut too. But then there began the most unaccountable little nagging in my mind, almost like a voice saying, get it cut, all the same, go and get it cut. In the end, I could stand it no more. I went. Now, my barber at the time was a fellow Christian. He was a man of many troubles whom my brother and I had sometimes been able to help. And the moment I opened his shop door, he said, "Oh, I was praying you might come today. And in fact, if I'd come a day or so later, I wouldn't have been any use to him." It awed me, it awes me still. But of course, one cannot rigorously prove a causal connection between the barber's prayers and my visit. It might be telepathy, it might be accident. I've stood by the bedside of a woman whose thigh bone was eaten through with cancer, who had thriving colony of the disease in many other bones as well. It took 3 people to move her in bed. The doctors predicted a few months of life, the nurses, who often know better, a few weeks. Then a good man laid hands on her and prayed. A year later, the patient was walking uphill too through rough woodland, and the man who took the last X-ray photos was saying, "These bones are as solid as a rock. It's miraculous." But once again, there's no rigorous proof. Medicine, as all true doctors admit, isn't an exact science. We don't need to invoke the supernatural to explain the falsification of medicine's prophecies. You need not, unless you choose, believe in the causal connection between prayers and the recovery. The question then arises, what sort of evidence would prove the efficacy of prayer, that prayer makes things happen? The thing we pray for may happen, but how can you ever know it wasn't going to happen anyway? Even if the thing was indisputably miraculous, it wouldn't follow that the miracle had occurred because of your prayers. The answer surely is that a compulsive empirical proof, such as we have in the sciences, can never be attained. Some things are proved by the unbroken uniformity of our experiences. The law of gravitation is established by the fact, in our experience, all bodies, without exception, obey it. Now, even if all the things that people prayed for happened, which they don't, this still wouldn't prove what Christians mean by the efficacy of prayer. For prayer is a request. The essence of a request, as distinct from compulsion, is that it may or may not be granted. And if an infinitely wise being listens to the requests of finite and foolish creatures, of course he will sometimes grant, sometimes refuse them. Invariable success in prayer wouldn't prove the Christian doctrine at all. It would prove something much more like magic, a power in certain human beings to control or compel the course of nature. There are passages in the New Testament which seem to promise an invariable granting of our prayers. But that can't be what they really mean, for in the very heart of the story, we meet a glaring instance to the contrary. In Gethsemane, the holiest of all petitioners prayed 3 times that a certain cup might pass from him. It didn't. After that, the idea that prayer is a sort of infallible gimmick may be dismissed. Other things are proved not simply by experience, but by those artificially contrived experiences, which we call experiments. Could this be done about prayer? I'll pass over the objection that no Christian could take part in such a project because he's been forbidden it. You mustn't try experiments on God, your maker. Forbidden or not, is the thing even possible? I've seen it suggested that a team of people, the more the better, should agree to pray as hard as they know how over a period of 6 weeks for all the patients in Hospital A and none of the patients in Hospital B. Then you'll tot up the results and see if A had more cures and fewer deaths. And I suppose you would repeat the experiment at various times and various places so as to eliminate the influence of irrelevant factors. The trouble is, I don't see how any real prayer could go on under such conditions. Words without thoughts never go to heaven, says the king in Hamlet. Simply to say prayers isn't to pray. Otherwise, a team of properly trained parrots would serve as well as men for our experiment. You can't pray for the recovery of the sick unless the end you have in view is their recovery. But you can have no motive for desiring the recovery of all patients in one hospital and none of those in the other. You'd not be doing it in order that suffering should be relieved. You're doing it to find out what happens. The real purpose and the nominal purpose of your prayers are at variance. In other words, whatever your tongue, teeth, and knees may be doing, you're not praying. The experiment demands an impossibility. Empirical proof and disproof is then impossible. But this conclusion will seem less depressing if we remember that prayer is request and compare it with other specimens of the same thing, i.e., how do we prove that other requests are effective? So we make requests of our fellow creatures as well as of God. We ask for the salt, we ask for a rise in pay, we ask a friend to feed the cat while we're on holidays, we ask a woman to marry us. Sometimes we get what we ask for and sometimes we do not. But when we do, it's actually hard to prove with scientific certainty a causal connection between the asking and the getting. The neighbour may be a humane person who would not have let your cat starve even if you had forgotten to make the arrangement. Your employer is never so likely as to grant your request for a raise as when he's aware you could get better money from a rival firm and is quite possibly intending to secure you a raise in any case. As for the lady who consents to marry you, are you sure she hasn't decided to do so already? Your proposal, might have been the result, not the cause of her decision. A certain important conversation might never have taken place unless she'd intended that it should. Thus, in some measure, the same doubt that hangs about the causal efficacy of our prayers to God hangs about our prayers to man. Whatever we get, we might have been going to get anyway. But only, as I say, in some measure. Our friend, boss, and wife may tell us that they acted because we asked, and we may know them so well as to feel sure, first, that they're saying what they believe to be true, and secondly, that they understand their own motives well enough to be right. But notice that when this happens, our assurance has not been gained by methods of science. We don't try the control experiment of refusing the raise or breaking off the engagement and then making our request again under fresh conditions. Our assurance is quite different in kind from scientific knowledge. It's born out of our personal relation to the other parties, not by knowing things about them, but by knowing them. And so our assurance, if we reach an assurance that God always hears and sometimes grants our prayers, and also that apparent grantings are not merely fortuitous, this assurance can only come in the same sort of way. There can be no question of tabulating successes and failures and then trying to decide whether the successes are too numerous to be accounted for by chance. Those who best know a man best know whether, when he did what they asked, he did it because they asked. So I think those who best know God will best know whether he sent me to the barber shop because the barber prayed. For up till now, we've been tackling the whole question in the wrong way and on the wrong level. The very question, does prayer work, puts us in the wrong frame of mind from the outset. Work, as if it were magic or a machine or something that functions automatically. But prayer is either a sheer illusion or a personal contact between embryonic, incomplete persons, ourselves, and the utterly concrete person. Prayer, in the sense of petition, asking for things, is a small part of it. Confession and penitence are its threshold, adoration its sanctuary, the presence and vision and enjoyment of God, it's bread and wine. In it, God shows himself to us. That he answers prayers is a corollary, but not necessarily the most important one, from that revelation. What he does is learn from what he is. Petitionary prayer is nonetheless both allowed and commanded to us. Give us our daily bread. And no doubt it does raise a theoretical problem. Is it possible that God ever really modifies his actions in response to the suggestions of men? For infinite wisdom doesn't need telling what is best, and infinite goodness needs no urging to do it. But neither does God need any of those things that are done by finite agents, whether living or inanimate. He could, if he chose, repair our bodies miraculously without food, or give us food without the aid of farmers, bakers and butchers, or knowledge without the aid of learned men, or convert the heathen without missionaries. Instead, he allows soils and weather and animals and the muscles, minds and wills of men to cooperate in the execution of his will. God, said Pascal, instituted prayer in order to lend his creatures the dignity of causality. But not only prayer. Whenever we act at all, he lends us that dignity. It's not really stranger, nor less strange, that my prayers should affect the course of events than that my other actions should do so. They've not advised or changed God's mind, that is, his overall purpose, but that purpose will be realised in different ways according to the actions, including the prayers, of his creatures. For God seems to do nothing himself which he can possibly delegate to his creatures. He commands us to do slowly and blunderingly what he could do perfectly and in the twinkling of an eye. He allows us to neglect what he would have us do or fail. Perhaps we don't fully realise the problem, so to call it, of enabling finite free wills to coexist with omnipotence. It seems to involve at every moment almost a sort of divine abdication. We're not mere recipients or spectators. We're either privileged to share in the game or compelled to collaborate in the work, to wield our little tridents. Is this amazing process simply creation going on before our eyes? This is how, no like matter, God makes something, indeed makes gods out of nothing. So at least it seems to me. But what I've offered can be the very best, only a mental model or symbol. All that we say on such subjects must be merely analogical or parabolic. The reality is doubtless not comprehensible by our faculties. But we can, at any rate, try to expel bad analogies or bad parables. Prayer is not a machine, it's not magic, it's not advice offered to God. Our act, when we pray, must not any more than all our other acts be separated from the continuous act of God himself, in which alone all finite causes operate. It would be even worse to think of those who get what they pray for as a sort of court favourite, people who've influence with the throne. The refused prayer of Christ in Gethsemane is answer enough for that. And I daren't leave out the hard saying, which I once heard from an experienced Christian. I've seen many striking answers to prayer, and more than one that I thought miraculous. But they usually come at the beginning, before conversion or soon after it. As the Christian life proceeds, they tend to be rarer. The refusals too are not only more frequent, they become more unmistakable, more emphatic. Does God then forsake just those who served him best? Well, he who served him best of all said, near his tortured death, "Why have you forsaken me?" When God became man, that man of all others is least comforted by God at his greatest need. There's a mystery here which, even if I had the power, I might not have the courage to explore. Meanwhile, little people like you and me, if our prayers are sometimes granted beyond all hope and probability, had better not draw hasty conclusions to our own advantage. If we were stronger, we might be less tenderly treated. If we were braver, we might be sent with far less help to defend far more desperate posts in the great battle. Well, that's the end of C.S. Lewis's essay. And if you enjoyed this video, you might like this one, where I tell the story of the whole Bible in 9 minutes with cinematic images and theological commentary. So do check it out.